nervous now, Mr.
all
Richard.
different kinds of bread. So, yeah, it's a good.
We're calling the meeting to order. He told me to.
But don't pay attention to him, he'll get you in trouble.
No, I wasn't. He's chairman. She's supposed to call the meeting to order.
Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Is this a condensed version of the 195 pages? Oh, I sure am glad. That way at least I'll have something to read.
Oh, good.
Jason, you can cut straight through. You can cut straight through there. Oh, it's the mouse. It's this mouse. Oh, Jason Counts and George Ragsdale, so 2 more. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? It is a little after 4 o'clock and we are streaming live, so I wanted to go ahead and get the meeting started so that anyone watching from home would know that we are getting started. Thank you again for coming to the second meeting of the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. Bill Ross, who is our consultant, is just handing out a copy of the slides that he'll be presenting this afternoon. His presentation will take about 10 minutes, and then he'll be open for questions and next steps. So he's going to get started, and I'll get Mr. Counts his copy of the slides.
Thank you, Pam. I'm Bill Ross with Ross Associates. I assume we're being recorded.
Yes, sir. Recorded and live.
Uh-oh, I better stand up straight. Our first meeting, that was a get-together, that was a greet and meet, very, very informal. I think we want to be a little bit more formal with this meeting, and also if anyone from the audience want to make some comments, maybe after we've done with the presentation and your questions, we can see if there are any other comments, if that's okay with all of you. Okay. And so this is semi-formal, which means I won't put the chairperson on the block here and make her run the meeting, if you don't mind. But or you can call it to order, Dr. D.
Oh, sure. I already did.
Okay.
Did.
Dang.
I can do it again.
Well, this meeting's going to take a long time if I don't listen, isn't it?
It's okay.
So. Let's see, I will try to put in perspective what we're doing, where are we, and what is in this methodology report, which, as you've seen, is very heavily into mathematics and projections and all of that sort of thing. But the bottom line is to try to determine what are the maximum impact fees that the county could adopt. And that's because the impact fee law says we can't charge too much. So we have to figure out where's too much, where's the ceiling. Now they can adopt lower fees. They can mix and match on the fees. They can adopt no fees at all, but knowing the maximum, at least they'll know they can't go beyond that point. So we're going to talk about where are we in the process, some basics to bear in mind, some example impact fees, and the road ahead. And some of what I'm going to say is really more a prologue to the ordinance, and we haven't gotten to the ordinance yet, but that'll be coming up next month, would be the first reading of the ordinance. So you'll all get, of course, all of that too ahead of time. And the important thing about the ordinance is that's where the fees are that get adopted. They're not going to adopt the methodology report. They're going to determine what do they want to charge, the maximum or something less, That's what goes in the ordinance. That's the most important part of that, other than complying with all the state law requirements. So we're up there in the upper left-hand corner. The methodology report, of course, is where we are right now. Upcoming will be the capital improvements element, so-called the CIE. That goes off to the Regional Commission and the State Department of Community Affairs for review. It's called an element because it's actually an amendment to the county's comprehensive plan. And that's some old-timey language that they don't use anymore, but they've never changed the impact fee law. While it's under review, we'll be working on the ordinance, which of course it includes the fee schedule, and we'll also be helping the county get organized. This thing's going to get computerized on the county's computers, for just like when you come in for a building permit, it's calculated for you. The impact fees will also be calculated for you. So remember this one, the methodology report on the left, forecasts and projects, that's what goes forward to the CIE to meet the DCA requirements. The DCA doesn't care what the impact fees are. They never ask. They don't care. So the maximum fees, the fee calculations won't be there, but everything regarding level of service will be. And while that's under regional review, as I said, we will be working with the county and you on the actual ordinance itself, which is where the rubber meets the road, as they say. Once DCA is through with their review, and this can take 60 days, it often does. So you're looking at a 2-month period maximum to hear from DCA that they approve it or they have questions or whatever. And at that point, the ordinance can be, well, actually the ordinance can be adopted before all of this, but it's the adoption of the CIE that enables the impact fees. So the ordinance may already be adopted and it's just waiting for that CIE to come up. And we're looking for the first, at the latest, the first meeting in January, and maybe earlier, because I didn't assume any special meetings along the way. But I have a schedule for you. It is an accelerated schedule. Some basics to bear in mind, and as I said, half of this is about the methodology report. The other half is really kind of a preliminary for the ordinance, because this shows up over and over. You can't charge new growth more than their fair share. There's got to be a connection between the fee charge and the improvements made. That's what the methodology report is all about. Where's that connection? It's the improvements that generate the fees. And this comes from a U.S. Supreme Court ruling on a case way up in Oregon. They don't have to be mathematically precise, but a rough proportionality is required. So even though you see my tables after tables after tables, they're probably more mathematically precise than the U.S. Supreme Court would actually say was okay. But roughly proportional didn't seem okay to me. You saw in the report, we have to make the calculations in present value. In other words, if we're going to build that fire station in 2040, we need to know how much is it in present dollars, so that in 2040 we have the amount of money we need to pay for the inflated cost of that fire station. That's what present value is all about. And level of service has to be the same for new development and existing taxpayers. The county can't push requirements on new development for an increase in services that the people here today, the residents and the businesses here today, don't have to help pay for. It's the same level of service for everybody, both the existing folks and the future folks. We can increase the level of service. It just means that the local folks have to pitch in, meaning the general fund or taxes somewhere, to make up the difference. But what you see in that methodology report does not assume any increases in level of service. It's what we got today extended forward so that the people who are here today, the business, the employees, and the residents who are here today will continue to enjoy the level of service they have today. And as new growth occurs, that level of service will not degenerate or get worse because we got more people to serve with the same facilities. That's the whole idea. New growth pays for new facilities that they are required, will require for their own services at the same level of service as what the folks who are here today are enjoying. Sometimes, well, you may have noticed there are some projects in there that are not 100% impact fee eligible. That's because some of the service provided by the facility is actually serving folks here today. And then along comes new growth with their portion of that project. So you will see there's a credit calculation in a few of the chapters. And this is because, as this is big news to everybody, new development generates more taxes. They start paying property taxes as they go along. So if I'll use a wild example, let's say an impact fee project is only 50% impact fee eligible. So new development is going to pay half or maximum at most half of the cost of that improvement. The other half, the county is going to have to cover from SPLOST, from general fund, from taxes somewhere because it's serving the existing folks. Well, as new growth occurs and starts paying their taxes, we have to figure, well, how many dollars of the new development taxes are going to go into, for instance, the general fund and turn right around and help pay for stuff they're not responsible for. So that's what that credit's all about. It's a discount so that new growth will pay their so-called fair share, unquote, through a combination of the impact fee they pay when they get a building permit and credit for the taxes they're going to generate that's going to come back and pay for the same facility. So now I'm giving you a taste of why there's so many tables in this report and why it goes on and on. We have to be absolutely careful that we are not charging new growth more than their fair share. And in some cases, their fair share includes taxes that they will generate, property taxes in these calculations in the future that will be used for those same facilities. If the county adopts an impact fee program, they're not etched in stone for all time. There's an annual report that the county will have to supply to the state to keep up to date in terms of a financial report based on the most recent fiscal year, what impact fees were collected, what they do with it, what's left over, any refunds they made, et cetera. And secondly, how many of you were involved in working on the comprehensive plan? So you probably remember at probably the back of that plan, there was something called the community work program, the community work program that has all those projects for 20 years into the future of when things might happen. And you only have to update that every time you completely update the whole comprehensive plan. Some folks do it more often, but that's what is required. But for an impact fee community, you have to update that community work program every year as part of this annual update. But you only have to list the impact fee projects. You don't have to update the whole thing. But part of this annual report is update the community work program for the impact fees. What do we do? What are we going to do the next 5 years? How much is it going to cost? Who's going to be responsible? And that sort of thing. And the fee schedule, it's part of the impact fee ordinance, as I mentioned. The county could start off with one fee in the ordinance, and by amending the ordinance, they could change it in the future. An example, I'm not recommending this, an example, when the city of Milton adopted impact fees, they were they wanted to adopt a maximum fee. In fact, the home builders were there speaking in favor of the maximum fee. I'd never seen that before. But they adopted a 50% discount across the board. They adopted all the fees at 50% and said, as part of the motion, in 6 months we're coming back and we're going full. This is just going to give you 6 months to get used to the idea, I guess. So there are many different ways that this could be done, but every time they amend the impact fee ordinance, this is special under the state law for just impact fees. They have to have 2 public hearings, at least 2 weeks apart. On any amendment, they're going to have to do this to adopt it. They'll have to do that to amend it so that the public hopefully will always know when there's an amendment possible to that ordinance. That's a very unusual requirement for any city or county in the state. In a nutshell, how do we calculate these impact fees? Well, how much is a project going to cost? How much are all those fire stations going to cost? And then any adjustments to that. This includes the net present value calculation. We say, well, we know what the fire station is going to cost, but when they build it in 2030, it's going to cost them more because of inflation. Then you deflate it back to 2020 for a present value. Credits, I talked about the credit that's already built in here. It doesn't apply to all of them, but for those that have partially eligible improvements and some portion of those improvements is not impact fee eligible, that's where those taxes go in and they come back as a credit against the impact fee, so that the impact fee for that public facility category would be lower than 100% of what they could be charging, on the theory that, well, those taxes are going to come right back and they're going to pay for parts of these facilities that aren't even eligible for impact fee. The bottom line is, between the taxes and the impact fee, it all totals to the fair share for new development. And so that's where you end up with the maximum net fee. And that'll be discussed, debated, and whatever as part of the ordinance. So here's some examples I just pulled out. We have, as you very well know, we have 2 service areas. All of the public facility categories are calculated with regard to public services, public facilities on St. Simon's. It's called St. Simon's Sea Island because it's all one service area over there. And of course, then there's the unincorporated mainland is the other service area. Brunswick's not part of this, and Jekyll Island is a world unto itself in these fees. So you see the maximum. People usually just talk about single-family houses when they're comparing fees from one place to another. The maximum is about $5,500 per housing unit. We don't charge depending on bedrooms or number of people who are going to live in it or anything like that. Straight housing units in all of those calculations. And on the mainland, it's more because they needed more facilities. It's a complicated reason. There's more people in a household on the mainland than there are on the islands. But theirs comes out to almost $7,000 at the maximum for all of these fees. And one other, yes. I'm trying to go backwards, yes.
Yeah, if I can just pause you for a second.
Sure.
These tables are quote-unquote examples, but that's real data, though. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. I mean, I just pulled those land uses
Right.
out to example, but those are the fees in the report for those uses. As you know, in the report, some of these fee schedules go on for several pages because
Right.
I lost count how many land uses are on there, but those are just some common, examples.
Understood. So you're saying the $6,000 and the $7,000 fees are real, based
Yes.
on your calculations?
Yes, those are straight out of the maximum fee schedule.
When I looked at your source data that takes you to the cost of services, meaning the value of property sold and the number of permits issued, they're higher in your assumptions than they are in reality. So how did you come up with that? And the example I'll use, I think for the island property values, you used something like $800,000 was the average of sales for that period that you looked at. But when we check the MSL listings, which have the actual values of the closed properties for single family and condominium, it's $600,000 for single family and $300,000 for condo. Long ways from $800,000.
My data source is Zillow.
Okay, so Zillow is full of inaccuracies.
So I think that you've got access to much more accurate figures than I do.
Well, Zillow is supposed to be fed by the MSL as well, and other sources. Even the county's tax records, Zillow probes. But I'm just saying, so in that example, it's off by a considerable amount.
I just took everything.
Can I step in here too with this? I have that on my same
Yeah.
list. And what he used is not sales. He used what was active on the market for one day.
Yes.
That's where his numbers came. It's active on the market. It
Yeah.
has
Numbers?
nothing. No, his numbers.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
They did not come
Right.
from sales.
So I'm a little bit concerned.
I put about a year. I said everything built in the past year that's still for sale today.
Right.
And I went through and click,
Right.
click, click, and just kept writing down, those are the asking prices, if you will, according
Exactly.
to
Okay,
Zillow.
so you're saying the $6,000 and the $7,000 fees are real, but they're not really real if they're not based on accurate
Those
feeder.
fees have nothing to do with the sales prices of the houses.
Okay.
The sales prices of the houses was used only, excuse me, to make projections on the tax base.
Right.
What can we expect the tax base to have? Because remember, I was talking about those
Understood.
credits. So I got to know, well, who's paying what portion of the taxes in year number X? But in terms of the impact fee itself, has nothing to do with the value of the units.
But-
Doesn't even go ahead.
Another thing about when you talk about the taxes, and you're assuming a full tax, and there are a number of exemptions
Yes.
on our taxes, and one of the biggest exemptions that we have is the senior exemption, which the school tax is pulled out of there, and so these people are not paying those tax levels that you're projecting.
I use the net M&O value, which is exclusive. All the exemptions have taken out. It's what's left after all of the exemptions that are available, the M&O exemptions, which is the maintenance and operating budget. That includes all, homeowner exemptions, old folks, every possible exemption is in the M&O exemption. So I'm working with the net tax base for residential, exclusive of the exemptions. So I think that's pretty much covered. But the key to it is those numbers tell me what to expect over the next 30 years in property taxes. And I do that only so that I can calculate what percentage of those property taxes can we expect from new growth. And so in 2030, let's say that new growth will generate 40% of all of the taxes collected that year. So 40% of what new growth isn't responsible for, but their taxes are going to go pay for, becomes the credit back against impact fees. So the fees you see are much lower than what they could have been if I hadn't given them that credit. So it's already kind of discounted for this whole concept of taxes are going to get paid by new development, and they're going to help pay for impact fees that new growth should be given credit for.
But you're also figuring your median price based on Sea Island prices and St. Simons Island prices. And when you figure a median price, in my world, in the real estate world, when you figure a median price, you definitely take off your highest price on the bottom and your lowest price on the top. And on St. Simons, an appraiser in appraising a property would never use a Sea Island property to come up with an average price. So I think your median price is incorrect.
I don't think there were any residences for sale on Sea Island when I went through Zillow. I think everything I took off of there,
It's on there.
I was kind of, it may be now, but I
No,
don't
you
think-
have it in your
Oh,
report.
do I have it in there
Yes.
too? Yeah.
May I interject something to add to this discussion? I'm going to tell you what I just heard and what I think is a potential action that we can take to maybe address some of the concerns that you two and probably others have with this. The information that y'all are questioning, where he got it or how he used it for the narrative and to help work into explaining what was happening, but it's not how he did not use that to actually calculate the impact fee. Is that what I heard? So what I would ask you two and any others of the board, if you have a better service or better data that you would like to refer us to, if you could email that to me this week, then I will ask Bill to use the data sources that y'all are referencing as more accurate. And then that way, because we want every part of it to be as accurate as possible. And Sherry, I completely understand even though Sea Island and St. Simons are neighbors, they're not neighbors when you're doing price comparisons. So we definitely want it all to be accurate. But I think if we do that, that might resolve the issue of making sure that there's not any misleading information in there, because if somebody's going to read that and think it's $800,000 an acre and that's not realistic, I want to make sure that's a correct document.
Okay.
So does that sound like a good
Yes.
solution to that
Yeah,
part?
I just, before we got down into the weed level on this issue of property value, I just want to also point out there are other issues with some of the data we use, and one is building permits. What's in the tables in the methodology, they're 100% higher than actual, okay? Our building permit run rate, and Pam, I got these from your office, is only half of what we used in this example. And I know that building permits is part of what establishes the level of service, okay, for those defined services. So I was a little bit concerned about that, as with, property value, and I wasn't sure where that impacted the fee. But it seems to me the growth rate is definitely based on permit activity, and we are way off with what we used.
No.
I mean, if we, excuse me, let me continue.
Okay.
It seemed that housing is based on population growth projections, got that, and you come up with some kind of assumption for housing required by the growing population. But we have real numbers for housing growth, and that is our permit run rate. And Pam has several years of it by the month, actually. And it seems to me we need to use something a little more reliable.
I agree entirely. The numbers I use were from the Census Bureau. They're the numbers that the county reports to the census on building permits. So I didn't even go to the county to get them. I figured, well, if we're going to tell the census that's how many permits they issued, it's good enough for me. But if, again, as Pam said, if you've got more accurate data, I need it.
Yeah.
I need it. This
Right.
needs to be as accurate as possible.
Right. I mean, somewhere, all these figures you've gathered do impact the fee calculation. Otherwise, why are you gathering it? So that's why I think it's important that we point out there are more accurate and reliable sources for the data.
Can I add one point to that? And I agree with what you're saying. And Bill listed all of his data sources and did a very thorough job in that technical appendix. The county is currently, through community development, working on 4 different plans right now, or just wrapped up 4 different plans, and all of those require a projection socioeconomic data, and every single one of them using either required data sources or my data sources in conjunction with their data sources, project our population growing higher and quicker than that building data would suggest.
Right.
So it's, I completely hear and agree with you, because I've asked those same questions, not to Mr. Ross because he was plan number 4, but plan number 1 and 2, I'm like, if I can pull the data and see how many permits I issued last year or every year for the last 10 years,
Right.
How is that escalating? How are you getting a different escalation factor?
Yeah.
And all of them using the required data are showing it. Maybe not quite as high as Mr. Ross's data, but up there in that same area, which I think gives it some reliability. But
The other thing, when you talk about projecting, these tables show flat growth. So that's just really weird. It showed the same permits or new houses every year. I mean, it was within less than 10%, okay. I mean, it's very minimal.
Yeah.
Which,
It doesn't,
you know,
it doesn't take a curve, it just follows.
which causes,
It doesn't take a curve, it just follows the population projections, which are pretty much straight line. You notice that I tried several different variations on projecting the population.
Okay.
With the growth curve versus a straight line and that sort of thing. Looked at population growth, again, according to the census estimates, for the 2000 to 2019 is what's available, as well as the 2010 to 2019.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah,
I
but
think
the new
those
housing
variations are in there.
the new
Yeah.
housing units was the same in year 2021 and 2050, okay?
Yeah.
Starts at 202, stays 202, 203 for
Yes,
30
because it's a
years.
straight line projection, and the housing units are projected based on the population. Population, the one that made the most sense, apparently, to me, was the straight line projection against the largest or the longest growth period that we have data from the census from. I say data because they're all estimates, because they don't go out and count the number of people every year. But that was a straight line. To get the housing units, it is the same number every year. The population is basically the same thing because they're straight line projections. The important thing is 2050. The important thing is not 2032 or 2021. The important thing is what are we going to get in the next 30 years, and that grand total of what we expect in new growth is how we calculate the fee, because those are the folks, the housing units or the employees that need to be served by these new facilities. So it makes, in terms of calculations, impact fee calculation, it makes no difference if it was a curve or a straight line or whatever. The answer is what do we got today and what are we going to have in 2050, and how are we going to handle serving all those folks. Could come in a big bubble. We could have no growth at all for 6 years and all of a sudden it explodes. We could get to a point on St. Simon's where we're full. There's the study, what's the name of the environmental study that
the shoreline protection.
TSW is working on?
Oh, that's the Envision Glynn.
Envision Glynn. I'm in contact with them, and I understand there may be environmental problems that you cannot overcome. There may not be. I don't know. The difference is I calculate the impact fee assuming growth will continue, but they're looking at the environmental problems that could halt growth in the process. If we reach, if St. Simon's is full in 2030, That's the end of the fee. There's no more growth. There's no more fees being collected. The fees that aren't collected, we don't need the facilities that were projected in the report. So the fee ends up being pretty much the same, which you're gonna recalculate these about every 4 or 5 years anyway. These are not etched in stone, as I said. As things change, they will be accommodated. What we're trying to do is the best estimate of those maximum fees given what we know. And as Pam said, the more accurate data I can get, the better this whole report will be. I'm working from the sources I can find. So please.
And let me say that before Mr. Strickland, I know how to point. No, I want to hear your point. Today is Tuesday. Mr. Ross is making very 98% similar this presentation to the Board of Commissioners Thursday night. I will ask him to verbally give an asterisk to the board and say, the advisory committee has asked me to look at some of the different data sets and potentially use other sources to make sure that data is as accurate as possible. It won't be done by Thursday. So I don't want y'all to be expecting all of that section to be changed by Thursday. So I will ask him to make that note to them verbally, and then we will work as quickly as possible to get that compared, and then we'll send you, here's what we sent you, and here's what these other data sources say. And that's a good recommendation. The board's not adopting this Thursday, they're just receiving it. So, so there won't be any kind of...
Well, that's what this is all about. We're just trying to flush it out.
Right,
And see if we all understand it.
Correct.
I'm fine with the methodology. I'm just concerned about the variables some of the data sources.
Absolutely.
Pam, I think the board, if you look at what the Board of Commissioners has coming up on Thursday, they are going to vote whether or not to move forward on this plan.
Well, so that's up. So I have been out on extended leave and just got back Monday. So the agenda item was done by some very other able people. His contract is to do the whole study. So I'm not sure why they're voting again, because he was going to do the whole study and then have the board decide at the end, are we doing this? Are we adopting this ordinance? So I do not believe contractually or legally the board needs to allow him to go to the next step, because they have already authorized the contract with him that goes to the next step. It goes to the very end deliverable. So I actually was emailing Dwani Patel, our county clerk, as this meeting was getting started, for us to figure out to make that correct, because I mean, if they want to consensus move him forward or not move him forward, if they don't move him forward, he made good money off of us, because his contract is a lump sum to do all of it to the very end for us to decide if we want to approve it.
That seemed like a quick thing to me. I mean, we all just got this 200 pages and it seemed quick, but that is the way it reads at this time.
It is, and so that's why I've been working with her to try to make sure that we make that very clear Thursday evening, and that we make it clear to everybody. So that's a very good point, and we also always get to get the guidance from our trusted county attorney about what language we can and can't change at this point, since the agenda has been advertised and printed. But so yes, that is where we are, and the board may want to vote and go ahead and end the contract. The contract, though, that they did approve was for the entire study, because the board, they can send that CIE up. They can adopt a CIE as part of the comprehensive plan, which is always a helpful document to know when you need fire stations and when you need fire apparatus. Always helpful to have. They can do all of that and then not adopt that ordinance. So it's all useful deliverables, even if they ultimately don't adopt impact fees.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Strickland, still nothing? Okay, Ms. Rooks.
Yes, I have a couple of concerns. I know you have developers up here and those in real estate up here who are very knowledgeable about, a lot of things. And my concern, I have a couple of questions, like who determine what the proportionate share is, and also what is considered fair share?
Do you want that in layman's terms or very technical professional
I
terms?
think you need to do it in layman's term, because you have a few lay people up here.
I am one, so I'm gonna take a stab at it first. So if today there are 10 people in the room, and by 2050 there are gonna be 15 people in the room, those 15 people just need to pay the additional services that we had to provide to go from 10 sandwiches to 15 sandwiches. They don't need to pay for all 15 sandwiches. They're only paying for the 5 sandwiches that they needed. Which is their fair share. So in these tables, and it's a lot of data, Ms. Rooks, I've had to read it twice going through to just to make sure I understand it in my head, the process that's happening. So we have a total number of people that are here today, and we'll say ballparks. We know how many ballparks we have here today. So we do that math of there are so many ballparks per citizen. So if you then multiply that by the number of 2, so if there's 0.1 ballpark for every citizen, and we want that ratio to always stay the same, every time a new person moves into the county, we need to accommodate with 0.1 part of a ballpark or a new house. So when you say who determines it, it's really a mathematical formula. You look at the amount of services per person today, and then you just multiply that by the amount of new people moving in. Did I help?
Okay, I think I understand that part, because if I'm not mistaken, at the last meeting, seems as though it was stated that the developer would incur the impact fee.
That's where we collect it, because when Mr. Duncan builds a home, he may not already have it sold. And usually, when Mr. Counts and his family built my home, I did not go get the permit. They handled all of that, and then I just got the house at a closing. So the way for us to feasibly collect the money is we charge them when they come in the door to get the building permit, and then they pass that cost along to the homeowner.
Okay, so it's all done at the time of the agreement between the developer and the homeowner at that point.
That's where the builder will pass, let's say it's $5,000, that's where they would add that $5,000 to the price of the home.
Okay, so the owner, from that point on, would have nothing to do with the impact fee?
So when I build my house, if it was a $250,000 house, it would now be $255,000, and then I just get a mortgage including that $5,000 of the impact fee, and I'm just paying it a little bit every month over my mortgage. So Mr. Duncan paid it for me up front to the county, to the people that collected it, but then he added it onto my house price, and then I paid for it in my mortgage.
Okay, that clarifies things.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get us way off of that, but I just felt like we needed to pause and
No apology. You're the advisory committee. You're advising me.
I'm just asking questions,
and particularly when there's better data available, because I scratch hither and yon looking for data. So
will you somewhere in your talk touch on the impact of tourism has on our level of service?
Well, I think it's more like indirectly. The tourists aren't going to pay a penny, needless to say. Right. It's the businesses that they support or whatever. The condos or houses that they buy, but they're rarely here, but they rent them out. That's really why we charge fees by housing unit, whether there's 12 people in there or no people in there.
Understood.
Because the population will vary.
Okay, so
for the seasons.
The fees for a new hotel, that's directed at the potential tourism, and that indirectly, right?
The fact that the hotel is there is a result of tourism.
Sure.
And that's how they're making their money. But in terms of The fire department's got to come if you call them up, whether you're a full-time resident or a tourist-oriented business or whatever. Same with the police, they got to show up. So the services are related to the housing units, number of employees in businesses and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like, they're almost surrogates for how we charge the fees, because we can't tag the individual people as they come by.
Obviously, and we're talking about the industry, and we're talking about just the consensus, the census of the impact on our services. That's, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. The ambulance has got to come whether it's a tourist or a homeowner.
And Mr. Duncan, as you look through those charts, a lot that you see are kind of tourist-oriented businesses. You'll see tend to be much higher, their impact fee. Amusement parks, hotels, motels tended to have a little bit higher cost per unit or per square footage.
Right.
Does the methodology take into consideration what impact that the impact fees themselves will have on future growth due to the front loading of the impact fee or the front loading of the taxes?
No.
So you don't anticipate that if a hotel, for example, has a couple $100,000 more in a startup cost, are they going to develop that hotel, or are they going to decide not to develop that hotel? Same thing with housing dwelling units. The added cost, would it be prohibitive, and would that curb growth, and would that curb job growth as well?
I can only give you the experience of others. Boards of commissioners and city councils take that kind of thing very much into consideration when they set the fees they're actually going to charge. I can't tell you what the middle ought to be or the impact ought to be. And we're going to talk about exemptions in a minute that also get to exactly the same thing you're asking about.
May I add to that?
Sure.
So the short answer is no. The methodology doesn't take a potential negative impact into housing growth because of the impact fee. Mr. Ross helped Lee County, Georgia, where I worked and lived, to adopt an impact fee, and then when the Great Recession started, they saw that it was being prohibitive to some of their commercial businesses, and they actually amended their ordinance to not have impact fees for commercial developments, to only have them for residential, because they did not see a negative impact in residential, they were only seeing it in commercial. So it can be tailored, and then the exemptions that he's talking about, I guess in that sense it does. If it's going to provide extraordinary economic benefit or extraordinary housing benefit, and the community gets to decide the definition of extraordinary, then those fees can be partially or completely waived. They just then have to be made up from the general fund or from some other source of money. The impact fee pot still has to have the same amount of money, but you may not want that developer to be the one to put it in. I'll get out of your hair. He's a solo show, and I've been bothering him being a duo.
Yes, let me move on. And in fact, I will come back to some of those things you were just asking about, because those are very, well, you see the bottom there where it says exemptions. The impact fee law allows communities to adopt exemptions from impact fees in those two categories. Now, the law doesn't define any of them. The law doesn't tell you what's an affordable house. That's up to the county. It doesn't tell you what's extraordinary economic or employment growth. There's only one community in the entire state of Georgia that has an affordable housing exemption, and that's a longer story. But the extraordinary economic or employment growth is a very popular one, and you can use it as it best fits the community. One city decided that it would be extraordinary if they could attract restaurants and a couple of other specific uses to the downtown area. So they said anybody who's going to come in and open a restaurant downtown, and this boundary was defined, we're going to give you a discount. Another one, they wanted a suburban county. They wanted to encourage high-end offices. And so they developed economic criteria. What are you going to pay those employees? How many of them are you going to have? A number of economic considerations. And if you met those considerations, you got a discount on your impact fee. So these things can be crafted to the community, however you define those things to be. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a question? You have to know that ahead of time.
Well,
What you're trying to do. At this point in time, I don't know of anything that we're looking at for extraordinary economic or employment growth.
That's because you don't have anything.
Exactly.
It's the ordinance. And that's
but-
why I said there's some things that are going to be coming forward in the ordinance. I just want to bring them to light now. They're not in, I didn't make any recommendations on what's affordable housing or economic. That's up
But
to
my
the board.
question to you is if there is an ordinance adopted, and then later these things come up within our county, especially the extraordinary economic or employment growth, can we amend the ordinance?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anytime. The only requirement is you have 2 public hearings, because it's the state law about impact fee ordinances requires 2 public hearings. But many people amend their ordinances for the fees to adopt affordable. Well, there was an affordable housing discussion in Rockdale County just recently, and we came up with a very unusual approach there that did not. The problem with the exemptions is the county has to pay the money into the impact fee fund to make up the difference for anything that is exempted. That's in the law. There are other ways to do this that are interesting. But when we get to the ordinance, you'll see where that stuff goes, and it'll be very ripe for that kind of a discussion of what you would recommend to the board.
Thank you.
May I add to that? In my experience in a community, the way we defined it in the ordinance was extraordinary economic or employment growth as presented or supported by the Chamber of Commerce, who was our economic development agency in that organization. So we made it generic enough that it wasn't 100 jobs and then somebody came in and went 95 jobs, and we thought that was great too. So we basically tied it to the Development Authority, but the Development Authority also knew that when they came with that, they had to either pull out of their bank account to pay the impact fee or give us a suggestion for where that impact fee would come. So because we also funded them, we thought that would be the source of money that would pay the impact fee. So they had to feel it was extraordinary enough that they were willing to pay the impact fee for them. So it was generic enough we didn't have to amend it.
And it's even on the agenda because I wanted to let you know that you've got a report talking about maximum impact fees. There are ways in which those fees can be reduced, either across the board or with exemptions, or with credits, or with individual appeals, which is a very powerful opportunity to work on the fees for a particular applicant under guidelines that have to be written out and in the ordinance. But there are many ways in which impact fees can be reduced, even from the fees that are adopted, with things like credits and exemptions and appeals. And that'll be, when we get to the ordinance, that'll be a good conversation for what you would recommend. This is a schedule. It's kind of an expedited schedule to get things moving along, because with the virus and all that, it's been much longer in getting this methodology report put together than was anticipated. So really, this schedule, you see where we are with the methodology report, and October 1st is when that will be before the county commission. We will start on two things then. We will start on the capital improvements element, and that's the thing, as I said, goes to the state for review. And we will start working or drafting on the ordinance, so that at your next meeting, we will talk about both things. Now, this capital improvement element is pulled out of the methodology report. We leave out all of the fee calculations. We change some of the introductory paragraphs and discussions about credits and that sort of thing. And we just narrow it down to what DCA wants to see, plus, of course, that community work program we talked about. So you've already seen the CIE plus at this point. So that I don't think looking at the CIE will require too much discussion. The fees aren't in it. The fee calculations aren't in it. That's in the methodology report. And the ordinance is where we start talking about what do we want to adopt. Talk about exemptions, talk about the appeals process, talk about the fees themselves. What would you recommend those fees be capped at or not? Or there are a lot of variations. I've got a whole spreadsheet we'll set up with you, and we can apply percentage reductions across all kinds of different ways to do that. But I'm suggesting that both the CIE requires a public hearing in order to send it to the region. The region sends a copy to DCA, and it starts that 60-day review process. At that same meeting, first meeting in November, I'm suggesting we have the first public hearing on the ordinance, which you will have already seen. We will have already had a meeting with you about that to get your input into it. They can't adopt it on the first public hearing. And conceivably, the fee schedule in the ordinance for the first reading might just be the maximum because they haven't figured out what they want to charge. Doesn't matter. It's the second reading, also a public hearing. That's the one that's got to have the fee they're going to adopt. They may not adopt the ordinance right then and there. They may adopt it subject to activation as soon as we get the CIE back from the state and adopted. That might be at the January meeting. We'd love to have that happen in December if DCA will just hurry up. We have to wait for their review. So this schedule says, okay, in the November meeting, we're going to be looking at both of those things. In the December meeting would be the second reading on the ordinance. Hang on a second. Yes, okay. Yes, December, and then actual adoption on January 1st. I have not assumed any special meetings. The board may want to have a special called meeting on this subject anywhere in this process. So this is sort of it's an accelerated process, but it's also kind of a worst case schedule for what we're hoping to do in terms of finishing up the job. It may be completed before the end of December. The board may want to move on ahead. The only thing we have to wait on is DCA's approval of that CIE, and then we're all golden at that point. So they could adopt the ordinance subject to, and as soon as the CIE is adopted, the ordinance would automatically take effect. Yes, sir.
Bill, there's been some, I think, concerns expressed about the amount of time we've had to look at 200 pages. If I look at that schedule, it says the methodology report's going to be finalized by the end of October, and there isn't any additional interaction with this committee before it is finalized, at least not on your schedule. When do we get another shot at looking at whatever changes you make with respect to the comments that were made tonight? That concern to me is even more so when we get to the ordinance. If it's like it is now, I'm guessing we're going to get to see the ordinance 2 days before it goes to the commissioners. That doesn't give us much of a chance to be able to react to it, or 2 days before it goes to a public hearing. I sure would like to see more time built into the schedule for the work you're doing to respond to the comments that we're making before it goes to the commissioners or to the public.
Thank you. The ordinance will be drafted and sent to all of you in a question of weeks, so that you'll have plenty of time to look at it before we even have a meeting. And you can call me up and you can write me emails and, with comments also as you look through it. There's a lot of legal stuff in there to meet all the state law requirements, but the key to it are some of the things we already just mentioned about exemptions. What do we want to do about exemptions and things like that? And like I say, I haven't assumed any special meetings on the part of the board. They may want to move even more quickly, particularly in December, with getting this thing wrapped up. It's up to them. I don't know yet where they are, but I apologize. I was getting, other than my own mistakes, I take full credit for screwing up a couple of tables. We were getting last-minute input from the various departments quite late in the whole process, so it just wasn't complete until about a week before you saw it, and even then it had the wrong tables in it a week before you saw it. But it's point well taken. Well, let me move on here. So coming up, of course, we've had the organization meeting with y'all. The kickoff public hearing was already held. So the presentation of the methodology report will be at the upcoming October 1st meeting, which I went ahead and checked it because we know that's going to happen. So we're looking at maybe transmitting the CIE on November 5th. And like I say, I will get that CIE to you as quickly as I can. It's not going to look a whole lot different. It's pulled out of the methodology report. Some of the introductory chapters are simplified, and we leave out the credits and all that other stuff. But it's essentially the methodology report light, if you will. There won't be any new calculations in there. Now, as soon as I get the information and I revise that methodology report, I'll turn that right around to you as well as the county. It's a historical document. It provides substantiation of what we did and when we did it and what the answers were. But the critical parts is a CIE, so we meet the state law, and the ordinance itself, which has all the provisions in it, and the impact fee schedule to actually be adopted. So, assuming no special meetings, it looked to me, waiting for the DCA to use their 60 days, that the January 7 meeting may be adoption of the ordinance and the CIE. As I said, they could adopt the ordinance sooner, subject to adoption of the CIE. I rarely get any comments. DCA takes 60 days to tell me they have no comments. I haven't figured that out yet. I guess I work for the wrong organization. But that's sort of where we are. I think that's the last slide. Yes, okay.
Pam, when will new commissioners be seated next year?
Yes, sir. So to add to the answer, George, Bill and I will sit down tomorrow and look at this schedule, and I think, well, I agree with you. Now, Bill very graciously took full responsibility. He's correct. We had some departments that had trouble gathering some of the technical data they had to give him, and he has been very pleasantly pestering them. And that's not me throwing anybody under the bus. He's got to get information from us to write the report. So please understand, we weren't trying to not give y'all time to read it. We were trying to gather all the information, and some of it can be pretty technical in nature. And even though, and so that is what it is. But we'll look at the schedule and build in, not set them because we need to talk to y'all and know dates and times and all that, but build in some additional times to have some advisory meetings. I think there may be meetings where we're here and Bill's on the Teams meeting up in Atlanta because he's been very graciously driving down here. And all those times he has a date, he's still driving down here. So rather than doubling his drive time down here, we may put him on the TV and let technology help us. So, and that'll take into account Sherry and Patrick Eric and anybody else, as soon as y'all can, if you can get us those other data sources, that'll help us figure out how long it'll take him to crunch new numbers so we can give you the different pieces and keep moving forward. Also, candidly, what did I tell y'all last time? It was like 1993, our Board of Commissioners at the time appointed an advisory fee committee. So since I've worked here only 3.5 years, we've been talking advisory, impact fees since I got here. And this current board that Commissioner Neal is a member on, they were the ones that decided, had a consensus, let's answer the question, let's do the study, and then make a decision so we're not here in 20 more years. That being said, we're going to have some new commissioners join us next year, and I was telling Bill before the meeting, I think it's only fair to take this at whatever part in the process it is to our current sitting board, who's the one that made that decision and adopted or approved the contract with Mr. Ross, and ask them and get feedback from them. Some boards that are getting ready to change want to finish everything up so there's no loose strings before the new board comes on. Some say, nope, the new board has to inherit this, so we want to start this process over. So you may see us in January saying we've got to educate a new board on what impact fees are and go through this whole process again. I told y'all 4 meetings. Sorry if it may be 8 or 12, but I'll have to start bringing sandwiches. But we will look at that because George absolutely, and all of y'all, I know George has been talking about impact fees longer than I've lived in the Golden Isles, but we want to make sure everybody understands it. We want to make sure everybody's comfortable with the data and feels comfortable with their recommendation, because y'all do send a recommendation to the commissioners, and we want them to have all the information so that they can make an informed decision about what they're going to do. So that's a long-winded way of me telling y'all that we'll get you a revised schedule, and then I will be talking to Mr. Hours and the chairman about how he wants me to get input from the board about how long they want this process to take. So if it's truncated, it may be because I need to get them some information, or they may say, no, let's just slow down and take a break for the holidays and come back in the new year with some new folks on the board. So, but I will get y'all that. We will make these changes, and I'm gonna get with Bill tomorrow to make the notes about the data that we are changing, and then to discuss, put a slide in for the different options, because we want to make sure it's clear Thursday night too that this is not a final. This is both of y'all and the board are getting first draft. So the board will see another draft with y'all's input and recommendations in it.
Well, I'm sure you scared the board to death when the Board of Commissioners to death with this big thing that they got. they just
No,
received.
Commissioner Neal likes to read very large plans from the Community Development Department.
Well,
yes,
I know, but
can
it
be,
was supposed to be. We were supposed to see it. And
yes.
I thought maybe even have a recommendation for the Board of Commissioners before it went to the Board of Commissioners. That was my understanding.
And this is me just speaking in layman terms. I probably make Bill cringe. The ultimate, we definitely need your input. They don't adopt this document ever. It's just an advisory document to the ordinance.
Right.
So we weren't expecting at any point for y'all to make a recommendation on this document. We're wanting your input to make it as good a document as possible. So, so yes, with timing wise, and in light of the pandemic, the board has been holding only one in-person meeting a month, and our legal counsel has told us that's the only time we can have these items on there for discussion. So that's what warranted this tight deadline. If he didn't get it to the October 1st meeting, it would have been November. So, and I'm sure you all can understand just trying to get schedules, but yes, as soon as we get that data, we will work, and by we, Bill will work to re-crunch that data and get it back to y'all as soon as possible. And please know I can be, I like to look for the missing punctuation or the typos or extra words, so please know I've done that. If you enjoy doing that too, please feel free, but I've got changes like that for him. But any substantive that y'all want to talk about, if there's something, and I know y'all didn't have a long time for 200 pages, if you see something else completely different, bring it up. And if it's something that we need to do a little round robin email to just say, hey, this was brought up, does anybody else have any input, we can do that and get it together. So I'm back in the office now. I'm back as project manager, so you will see me and Bill really communicating with you on this, and Janet. So
Pam, I'd just like to add, there was a lot of good information in what's been gathered, and this is a good repository of those services anyway, that are part of the impact study. You can't go to any one source and get this amount of information within the county website.
correct, and that's one thing I was trying to explain. This capital improvement element, if it's only used to help us coordinate all of our capital needs on a global scale, it will be well worth the money that we've spent. So
I think there's other uses for the
absolutely.
data. Yeah.
So I think that was it, and we don't have the next date at this point because with the input tonight, we'll send you a revised schedule and then probably a doodle poll to find dates that work for everybody. Is everybody getting the emails from Bill? Okay, all right.
It's only the county that's.
The county's been having some issues getting his emails, so.
They use a Gmail account to
Okay.
contact some of them, but not others. We
Yeah.
haven't figured it out.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Yes, ma'am?
Did
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Neal have a question? Commissioner Neal?
I have a couple.
Okay.
If time is of essence, we can do this Thursday night.
I have all the time in the world for you, and I'm not going to be here Thursday night, so.
Do I need to come to the microphone?
Yes, sir, just because they're live streaming.
You know, and I'm Wayne Neal, Board of Commissioners, but it was my understanding that we'll put this study, this advisory panel together. You guys will digest this information, and I know you hadn't had time to digest it all. I know I haven't. And if we put it, then I thought that you would be bringing these suggestions and your recommendations to us as a Board of Commissioners. And I would think that it would probably need to be done over work sessions so that we can ask questions and discuss it in work sessions rather than in a compressed, already 3 or 4 hour long commission meeting. And, you know, I would prefer that you recommend to the commission that we take this in steps. If this is what's going to be right for Glynn County, then we need to do it right. And pushing this thing to try to get it condensed down to get it done before the end of the year, I don't think makes sense. It just sets the stage for repealing it next year or being involved in lawsuits. The methodology, I think, is an important component of how we consider this thing. And you have questions about the methodology. I have questions. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just have questions. And I don't think we can answer those questions in an hour's period. And so I would like to see us, you have time to digest it, bring it to the Board of Commissioners in a work session, give us time to digest it, and then discuss it, and then put it on a calendar and bring it forward with informed information. And that's how I'd like to see it go. Thank you.
Mr. Neal, to that point, would you like me to talk to Mr. Hours and Mr. Mumford about potentially moving, and Chairman Browning, about moving the item from Thursday to your October work session?
Personally, yes.
So I can ask that. Now, that would still be a very tight turnaround for you all because the work session is the third Tuesday of the month. But when I meet with Bill tomorrow, we'll figure out how quickly we can turn around the data to give y'all time and see if that October work session makes sense. It may not, it may still be too soon, but, and they may tell me, stuff it, Pam, we're hearing it Thursday, and then going on our merry way. So, but let me ask that, and so by close of business tomorrow, y'all should have an email from me just giving you the status of all this. Here's the direction I've been given, here are our next steps. So I think we can do that. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, do I need to adjourn?
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Nice
So
job.
good, thank you.